Good morning, well, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever you are around the world. Thank you for joining us today on GMAT Club. We have two applicants joining us today, willing to put their resumes up on the screen and ask questions about them, discuss them for their own benefit, but also for your benefit out there. So we hope to go through those. We look forward to going through those. We thank our two candidates for joining us. We have Dia as well as Vashi. My name is Greg Guglielmo. I'm the founder of Avanti Prep, an MBA admissions consulting firm based out of New York. We invite people to learn more about Avanti Prep by visiting avantiprep.com or checking us out on GMAT Club. You'll be able to review all sorts of information, sign up for a free consultation on our website if you'd like. And those are some ways to learn more. I believe you have a link there now up on the screen. But without further ado, let's dive into these candidates and dive into these resumes today. And again, with the hopes that some of this information can be extractable or applicable for all of you out there. We're going to start with Dia. You're going to see some slightly different names. You do go by Dia, of course. We were just talking about that. Thank you again for joining us today. Why don't we start, Dia, if you don't mind, with just like a 1-minute introduction, and then we go into resume questions for you. I'll offer other feedback. We'll then switch over to Vashi, do the same. And then if there are other questions even unrelated to the resume, we can address those after. So Dia, please take it away with a brief introduction just to give people a little bit of context into you and your experience.
Okay, sure. Thank you, Greg, and thank you, GMAT Club, for selecting me. So my name is Tia, and I am from Indonesia. So if I can summarize my own profile, I'm a double degree holder from Universitas Indonesia and Rijksuniversiteit Groningen. So from Universitas Indonesia, I earned Bachelor of Economics in Management. And from Rijksuniversiteit Groningen in the Netherlands, I earned Bachelor of Science in International Business. I also work in a Silicon Valley-based venture capitalist, where I was employed there. I helped the company to invest in 7 investment deals across Asia and USA within 6 months of my employment. And then after that, I was working in Rakuten Indonesia as an e-commerce consultant. And when I was there, I won a Shugi Award. I won a Shugi Award. The category was for getting things done, basically because I was successfully selling advertisement spots in from the company, and I was become the top sales women in selling those advertisement spots. And then after working in an e-commerce company, I went to a bank. It's called Permata Bank. I basically in that. When I joined the bank, I started from a management trainee program. But then after that, as I graduated, I joined the strategy team of the bank. When I was working as a management trainee, I was doing digital banking projects as well as retail banking transformation project with the Bain & Company, the consulting company. When I designed the digital banking projects, I was responsible with designing the business requirements as well as the system integration that is required to develop the digital banking products and services. And one of my projects won the Asian Banker Indonesia Country Awards. It's one of the most valuable awards for a banker, especially because we were recognized for our digital capabilities at that time, where the banks in my country was emerging, going to digital banking. And then after I graduated from the management trainee program, I earned the highest role assigned for all the graduates. So like the other graduates in my batch, they are usually assigned under like a manager position, but I was the only one that was assigned as under a division head. So I was 1% away from the CEO. So I was kind of proud of that. But something happened in 2018. I delivered my daughter, and she is experiencing a rare disease. And at that time, I decided that I have to resign from the company, because at that time as well, the hospital that was taking care of my baby, told me that there were only two options: either to hand it over my baby to the the medical professionals, or handling my own baby myself. And as a mother, I decided to provide palliative care for my baby, and that's why I have resigned from the banking job. But while I resigned from the banking job, I try to do something, not only just providing palliative care for my baby. Now I am a certified yoga teacher, and I found a platform as well to advocate women and children's health rights. Because once I become a mother, and as a rare disease daughter mother, I know that, like, doctors, it's pretty. My baby's condition is pretty rare in Indonesia, so she's struggling with abnormalities from brain to foot. And but the the things that I learned is that because she is so rare, I got to learn all the medical conditions related to the all organs that is my baby is dealing. And by then I'm able to connect with other parents as well as doctors, not only from Indonesia but also like across the world, trying to learn the disease about my baby. And that's why I founded the platform to try to advocate like women's and children's health rights, basically. Yeah. Okay, Greg. I don't.
We appreciate that. We appreciate that, and we do hope. We're sorry to hear about. Imagine it's a very trying time. Obviously, something that you had to invest your heart and soul in, and we hope things have gone well. Just to transition into the resume specifics. For purposes of this conversation, I do apologize. I didn't mean to cut you off there. What specific questions, that context is very helpful and actually will inform our conversation here today. What specific questions do you have about the resume?
Yeah, I think my specific questions is that the first thing is that because I've been resigning from the last employment, as in formal employer, was like in 2019. And now in 2021, I haven't started like a formal employment job, but I want to, like restart my career in a strong footing. That's why I try to decide I want to restart by taking education. But while between 2019 and now is that I'm trying to do stuff, but it's just not related with my previous, like career experience. Like my career experience is mostly in finance and all that. But now after I become a mother, I involve more on the, like, for example, health projects, and then, raising awareness on rare disease and all that. I'm trying to find a way to best present it in a CV, but I just don't know how. That's all.
Got it. Okay. Again, very helpful. And even there, even if it was a lot of information, it actually just a quick point for everyone out there. It goes to show us that when thinking about resume and resume reviews, sometimes it might feel like a very document-oriented experience, and ultimately it is. Ultimately, it is about what ends up on the page. But that little dialogue there is a signal to us and a reminder to us that as you think about your own resume, or if you're working with a friend on it, a colleague on it, an admissions consultant on it, whomever, dialogue matters and story matters and context matters. So had we dived straight into just the text on the resume, we might have had some different thoughts or different experiences in tackling this, as opposed to hearing Dia go through some of that. So that's just a reminder, again, even with the resume, it's going to end up, the exercise ultimately ends up, how do I fashion these bullets? How do I capture who I am? But it's very important from the start to think big picture, to think dialogue, to make sure you're talking about or thinking through all of the different corners of your experience. When we start working with people, if it's a deep enough engagement, we have a questionnaire that asks about all these different corners of your life. And you touched on some context around why you left your job. Very, very personal and important things that have happened in the last couple of years, things that you've founded or created in the community or these other initiatives you've been involved in, as well as now where your interests are shifting. So all of these things are important to know. And again, a reminder for folks out there, even though what we end up, we're going to end up tackling things on a page, it feels like a very document-oriented exercise, but there's strategy and context and considerations that go into this and should inform the exercise from the very beginning of the process. And it really, really is a process. So now to take some of the things you mentioned, Dia, I am not personally, sometimes you might have seen this and people would see this out there sometimes in the marketplace or for job resumes. Sometimes people put little blurbs at the top of their resume that try to offer a summary of their experience. I don't love them, and I don't think that they're necessary in MBA resumes if the MBA resume is well done. There could be a thought here, though, Dia, in your situation, excuse me again, just because of the uniqueness of it and the uniqueness of the last couple of years, that somewhere on the resume to present a little bit of that context and a little bit of that text, it could be at the top. It's something I'd have to really think about and develop a more specific opinion on in your applications, of course. If what's gone on in your life the last couple of years as a mother and with your daughter has shifted your goals and shifted your focus, that should absolutely be captured in your essays. If there are more explanatory and clarifying things, like you have an employment gap, you've been out of work because you've had to dedicate your heart and soul, very understandably, to your daughter, that's something that should be explained in an optional essay as well. Or some schools will have a little area in the application where you explain employment gaps. So those are things that are going to be captured elsewhere. But even still, I know you've got a little line on there now about resigning for maternity reasons. Oops. But it is possible, and you have to play around with the exact mechanics of where it would show up and how it looks, how it feels. Is it at the top? Is it at the bottom? Is it within this job? I do think that there's an opportunity here, very unique opportunity, something that's not really applicable to many other people, but to offer some sort of immediate explanation on the resume. Is it a line? Is it 2 sentences? Is it 3? I think you'd have to play around with that. I'd have to see how it comes to life. But it is enough of a consideration, in other words, to try to get that context, not in long or essay form, but to get that context onto the resume so that when somebody sees you and meets you on the resume for the first time, they become aware of this context and aware of this information from the get-go. Even though they're going to see it in the application, I think it provides an important explanation here. Otherwise, a person looks at your resume for the first time, they might see, she hasn't been working since April of 2019. What's with that? Or why has she started getting involved in these other things related to emergency care and such? I think having that explanation, maybe it is that 2 or 3 line blurb at the top, maybe it's something down at the bottom, but I think that's worth considering. So that maybe answers, and maybe more than answers, your question. I have certainly other thoughts I can share, but other specific questions about the resume, other specific questions you may have?
Yeah, I think that's basically, like the biggest question that I have. I was thinking that whether the 2 years of like unemployment, like formal unemployment that I had, would play against me. I remember that before I was pregnant, I was actually in touch with some admissions teams from across schools, and they are actually quite accepting. And at that time, when I was trying to submit my GMAT score, suddenly I was pregnant, and then the process stopped there. And then I was thinking that which points that I would like to highlight, because before I gave birth to my baby, they are quite interested with the achievements that I had, especially like after I graduated from from Rijksuniversiteit Groningen and Universitas Indonesia, and they're interested with the achievements that I achieved throughout my employment. And I was thinking that, well, okay, then after 2 years of leaving those formal employment, whether is that going to be the thing that play against me or something like that? So yeah.
No, and I think that's something maybe more of, let's say, an admissions related question than a resume specific question.
Yeah.
I think, my gut reaction is no. I think that in general, like long employment gaps do play against candidates and require explanation, but yours is, I can't think of a more justified, a more understandable situation. So I do not think it would or should play against you. I think that is, I think that if it does, it shows an extreme lack of empathy on whoever would hold it against you. So I think that as long as the context is provided and the explanation is provided, and if it does inform your goals, let's say, it would show up in your goals essays. If it, the more literal explanations, I would come in an optional essay or additional information essay. Sometimes you'll have 200 words for that, 250, 300, 500. You don't have to fill the whole essay with it, but I think some degree of explanation around it. I think if you explain well, then there will be the utmost of understanding on the part of the admissions committees. And there should be, if there's not, there should be, because what is more understanding than a mother who needs, whose child, whose daughter experiences challenges and therefore needs care. So no, I do not think it would be held against you. And again, if it's explained and even harnessed in certain ways, it will reveal who you are and reveal your character and reveal how you've tackled this challenge and overcome it. And would in those ways perhaps really be authentic and play into strengths for you. One more, do you have any other resume specific questions?
Yeah.
Otherwise I can offer download some thoughts to the folks out there.
Sure. The last question is that I realized that, for example, I need to put like a summary to give a context about the CV, all the achievements that I have. When I try to do that, as you can see, I submit like 2-page CVs, and I think it was so ugly because I was just trying to put like everything, because I did not want to, to sacrifice the good points the MBA admissions team told me like a couple years ago before I was pregnant. Like, for example, they mentioned that they like that I highlighted, for example, several achievements, but then with the additional, accomplishments that I do after I deliver my baby, I think I have to, just like for the sake of having it like 1-page CV, I think I have to sacrifice like several points that I used to highlight in the previous year's accomplishments. So yeah. Okay. I don't know whether I should just push it like to 1 page, or maybe I can like tolerate like 1.5 page in order to keep the good points that I mentioned, but at the same time can convey what I have done as well in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
Do you have any suggestion on that? Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that and we'll talk when I kind of go through. I'm going to go through a few points here that I think will hopefully be even more applicable for everybody out there as they think about their own resume, as well as for you, Dia. I don't think you need I think that what I was mentioning a few minutes ago about a potential 2 lines to provide immediate context into why, what has happened the last 2 years? Why have you been, away from your job, and very understandably so again. I don't think you need a separate summary or a separate section like explaining your accomplishments. I think that whatever accomplishments there are in the last 2 years or before that, or while you were in college, those should show up within the relevant sections of the resume. So as you map out what fields, what categories, what things I have on my resume, whatever, if the accomplishment occurred in the last 2 years under the purview of a certain community activity or extracurricular that you've been involved in, that accomplishment would show up in that section. If you have professional accomplishments, they would show up in the professional section under the appropriate job. If you have college accomplishments, they would show up in the university section. So I don't think you need some sort of separate, so a little bit of a separate explanation, maybe, again, very unique to you and unique to your circumstances, not something for everybody else out there to consider. But maybe at the top, maybe at the bottom, maybe under that job, we'd have to play around with that a little bit. But I don't think you'd need a totally separate summary section of like accomplishments. I think whatever the accomplishments are, they go under the listing of whatever they occurred. Last couple of years, some community activity, something you founded, a job, college. Other things, just to segue into other points that I hope are going to be more broadly applicable. I'll spend a few more minutes on this to transition over to Vashi. So let's look, you talked about pages and pagination, Dia, a moment ago. By and large, I think as a general rule, full-time MBA programs or similar type of programs, we should be targeting one-page resumes. Most schools will even state that in their instructions, that you're required to submit a one-page MBA resume or a one-page professional style resume. Once in a while, a school will allow you, technically, if you read the instructions, they might allow you to exceed a page, but I don't think you really need to. I think the situations where you exceed a page, I'm thinking of like the MIT Sloan Fellows program is designed for mid-career professionals with an average of 14 years of experience. Well, they want a 2-page resume. Some executive programs out there, people have 15, 17 years of experience. That might warrant a 2-page resume. There might be a couple of schools for full-time and for kind of like, what most people on GMAT Club are dealing with. They might technically allow more than 1 page. I don't think you need to do it. In fact, I'd counsel against it. Unless there's like a really rare situation. I think you want a 1-page resume. I would stick to 1 page. I would encourage most people to do that who are applying to like kind of traditional programs or full-time programs. You will be able to capture, it's kind of the challenge of the exercise in a sense of producing a great resume, but you should be able to capture everything on 1 page. And there are different kind of formatting mechanisms used to accomplish that, which we could talk about a little bit. The other thing about 1 page is you as an applicant do not want to be recreating the wheel for different schools. You're going to want scalability of your resume. Your resume is something that if you're applying to 4, 6, 8 schools, you get it right once, you have your resume. You might think of a certain improvement or certain tweak later on, but you're really not going to be wanting to reinvent it every time. The only thing to watch out for is some schools, once in a while, I'm going to cite MIT again, for the folks out there who are interested in MIT Sloan. They have a really, really specific resume instructions. They want things in a certain order. They want certain sections on there. They want your name redacted from the top. They want size 10 Times New Roman font. I happen to think 10 is quite small, but that's what they want. So we go with that. So that's the one instance where maybe you would have to move things around a little bit, change things up. But other than that, 1-page resume, would be 1 page also, but 1-page resume, and I think you have the same resume essentially for each program that you apply to. Other just observations on here that hopefully can be extractable, applicable for everyone else out there. Font color, I think let's go black, Dia. The gray is I think it just creates a certain lightness. It undermines, I think, the forcefulness or the strength in a certain subconscious way of the resume. So I think you could go away from the gray. Let's go black. I would say probably for most people, it's going to be black for everything, black font for everything. Once in a while, I have seen people judiciously use like a light, a certain other shade for like the name of their companies, the name of their universities. It's possible. I don't think you need to do it. It's possible when done right, but I would be, definitely black as a default for your regular text. Probably black everywhere. But if there are certain instances, I would just caution people against doing you don't want to have like too many different colors on here, too many different font sizes and font types. We want consistency, professionalism, strength within the resume. So just color is something that stood out here for me as well. A couple other formatting things, and Formatting is going to sound, it sounds a little boring. It's like, okay, let's get into the content. But formatting is important because it dictates the aesthetics. It dictates the experience. It dictates the blink or the first reaction that people have when they see your resume and the feel that they get from you. Is it a professional resume or is it kind of weird, different, that sort of thing? And I don't mean to knock, people have I see sometimes creative approaches to resume. Great if it works. But this is, it's not a place where you want to end up looking like sloppy or experimental or anything like that. So let's talk about some more of those formatting things here. I think a couple things, Dia, is we look from like a real estate perspective. What percentage of your resume is taken up by certain things on here? You've got a second section on here called certification. It takes up a lot of the resume. You mentioned a concern. How do I cover all of the different things that I want to cover and keep it to one page? Well, that's somewhere where my eye goes. The certifications that you have, it's like, I don't know, a quarter of the text below your name, maybe even a little bit more, allocated to these certifications. If they're just certifications, they could probably be like one line each, if not even the first two of those on their own line. I'd probably look at moving certifications down into an additional information section at the bottom of the resume. But I think that is something we'd look at and say, oh, that certification section, that feels like a quote unquote inefficient use of resume space. So let's look at an opportunity here to still capture that material, but do so elsewhere and do so perhaps with one-line strips or in a section that says additional information, then labeled certifications. Or if you have a lot of certifications, maybe the section could be called certifications, but it's basically additional information. The certifications can be captured, but let's do so in a more efficient use of space. Another formatting thing that I think is important in general, as well as important as you think about space on this resume. We'll see a more traditional approach to this in Vashi's resume in a few minutes. Where you have the dates on here, where you have the dates on here right now is kind of unconventional. And I think it also creates an inefficiency of space usage. We will typically say, when Avanti Prep works with clients, we typically are going to put the dates at the, probably the right-hand side of the page on the same line as the company, let's say. So, or next to the role. If you have multiple roles at companies, there are slightly different ways to do it depending on how many roles you've had at a company. But you're usually going to find the dates off to one side or the other. There are some resume formats out there that might even have I think the Harvard format, for example, has the dates down a left-hand column of the page and then the information next to them. But the point is, whether it's the left or the right with the dates, they won't be above the job. They'll be like adjacent to the job. And again, we'll see I can illustrate this a little more visually when we move over to Vashi's resume in a moment. So I think right now, having the dates where they are, you're using up an extra line for every date, and it's also kind of makes them a little harder to decipher. Let's get those off to the right hand side. So in other words, you have your company on one side, then along that same line, you might have the date there, or it could be on the left, like I said, but they wouldn't be above the company or above the job title. Really quickly too, just on some visuals, I mentioned consistency before. I think there are some different font sizes and such on here. I'm looking at the dates above your most recent job experience. Look smaller than when I look at the dates for some of the previous jobs. So that's something we'd want to make sure gets addressed. We want consistency, visual consistency across these different things. Other observations, from an ordering of section perspective, there are slightly different perspectives out there on this. And a lot of different perspectives out there on resumes, by the way. You talk to a lot of different people. They have different styles. The beauty is in the eye of the beholder a lot of times. So certain things are subjective with it. But generally, you're going to see either experience at the top, then perhaps let me just actually say what I typically recommend and prefer and think is most effective. But I'll also then comment on, some certain counters to that, or people say, oh, I think you should do it this way instead. My recommended sectioning for resumes, at least as a starting point for most people, would be professional experience at the top of the resume, then a section that covers extracurriculars or leadership or community experience to the extent the applicant has enough of that to warrant a section that covers that. Then education, and then additional information where you might capture skills, interests, languages, international stuff related to jobs would go with the jobs and stuff like that. But certifications, coursework, if you took additional coursework beyond your regular education. So my default, where I like to look first, is a 4-section resume, professional experience, community or leadership or extracurriculars. It could take on different titles depending on the applicant. Then education, then additional information at the bottom. Some reasons for this, and you'll run into different opinions again on this. Most people applying to full-time MBA programs, on average, they're going to be about 4 years removed from undergrad. They'll be 5 years removed at the point of enrollment. Your professional experience is who you are and what you've done for the past several. It's not all of who you are, but it's what you've done. It's most recent. It's what you've done for the past several years. Your education preceded that. So that's why I believe leading with professional experience is most effective. People have different opinions on that, though. Some people say you should put the education at the top. I don't totally agree with that. I think that once you're in the MBA program and you're a student recruiting for jobs, then education goes back on the top because that's current for you. Your most recent is the fact that you're in the MBA, and they're even, MIT Sloan, I mentioned earlier, they have a very prescriptive format for their resumes. They do have education at the top. So just make sure you're following the rules where they are. Some people say, oh, well, you don't need an extra section for extracurriculars or leadership or things like that because it's covered in the application, but it's not covered in all applications. Wharton lets you list, I believe, up to 5 activities in your application, but they give you no explanation. You're not able to elaborate. You're not able to say what you've done. Other applications, MIT Sloan, Michigan Ross, they don't even let you list activities in their resumes. There's a little bit of a movement among certain schools toward leaner applications. And because of that, the opportunities to list your activities, your leadership, your community, these other differentiators beyond your job have diminished. And you have to use the resume. The school is forcing you to use the resume to do that. And even beyond that, even for schools that do let you list your activities or your leadership in the app, a resume that is dominated by professional experience can feel one-dimensional. It can feel unidimensional. We'd rather create a blink, again, an initial reaction on the part of the person reading your resume that is more diverse, that, yes, covers the professional experience with due amount of space, but also then captures these other elements of who you are. It doesn't have to be exactly how I've described, but those are just some thoughts, suggestions, and rationale behind that. And in your case, Dia, to take it back to you, if you did have a section like that, a leadership or community or extracurricular type section, and if I heard correctly, you've founded or started some initiatives related to what your daughter's situation, that's where those would go. And now you'd have an opportunity here. Yes, the professional experience would be presented, but you'd also then be able to cover, and if there's anything else you do leadership-wise, community-wise, I'm talking outside of work, it can go in that section, that leadership or community section, to really give it an opportunity to breathe on the resume, to give you an opportunity to showcase that rather than hiding it or feeling like, oh, I have no place to put it. So those are some observations here. Other last thoughts, and just with an eye on the clock, we'll transition over to Vashi and kind of continue this conversation. I think they'll come together. I see on page 2, you've got invested deals here for one of the firms you've worked with. If those are deals you were involved, we're going to, again, want to get this down to a one-page resume. But if those were deals you were involved in or had a hand in, then for the investment-related jobs that you list, those deals should be referenced. Those projects or deals should be referenced under the section where you address that company or you address that role. And there are different formats even for that. People who work in investment banking or consulting or investment-related roles, you might often see something called selected project experience or selected deal experience or selected investments. And that's where you could comment on what those deals were and what role you played, what impact you had within them. So let me pause it there. We will kind of continue this conversation with Vashi. It'll be an evolution in a certain sense of it. But any last questions, Dia? Anything we want clarified before we move over to Vashi?
No, I think it's pretty much clear. So thank you very much, Greg, for the opportunity to reviewing my profile.
All right. And thank you for your willingness to put yourself out there and share your story, both professionally and personally. And you can, again, see here for you, Dia, and the folks out there, obviously your professional experiences we want captured here, but the resume can capture more than just you as a worker. Here, Dia shows us an example of how something very personal has infused, really kind of influenced the last couple of years, Dia, of your life. And you've gotten very involved from a certification standpoint, emergency care, the direction of what you've been involved in has shifted a little bit. And here are some ways we're kind of laying a foundation structurally in the resume to give you the opportunity to highlight and unpack the value of those things. So we appreciate, again, you sharing your story and resume with us for the benefit of everybody out there. And now let's transition over to Vashi. I will share his resume right now. And Vashi, thank you for your patience there. And again, for your willingness to put yourself out there. Why don't we give you a really brief intro, if you don't mind keeping it to like 1 minute. Folks have a little bit of context. They could also see some of your experience up here now on the page, but 1 minute intro, and then we could dive into your questions.
Definitely. So, first up, I'd like to thank GMAT Club for giving me this opportunity to attend this session, and thank you to Greg. So, I'm an engineer by education. I've done my bachelor's in information technology. Ever since I've been working for almost 4.5 years now as a data engineer at formerly at a Fortune 100 company, and currently at a fading startup, if I could put it that way. As a data engineer, I've had the chance to work with cross-functional teams across geographies, and I've managed to make some cost-effective and influence the finances of the organizations which I've worked at. Outside of work, I am a keen footballer. I've got a great interest in football, and I like golden retrievers. So that's it. That's it about me.
Great. Well, we appreciate that. And thank you again for joining today and putting your resume up on the screen.
Sure.
Do you have specific questions that we can start off by addressing?
Yes. So the first question is with regards to the real estate that we've put that I've put out over here. So I have a doubt. So if you take a look at my resume in entirety, it's almost a 50-50 with regards to professional experience and the additional information. So I was wondering if that would be viewed in a negative light, because as I come from the male engineering Indian background, I just wanted to present as much diversity as possible, and put myself outside the pack as much as possible. So I've consciously put down a lot of additional information in education. Do you think that reflects poorly over here?
Great question. So yeah, we look at and I zoomed out a little bit on the screen. It's going to be harder to see the specific text for a second. I'll zoom back in. But to Vash's question about overall real estate and trying to differentiate oneself? I think the answer lies somewhere in between. Let's say there are shades of gray to the answer.
Sure.
I think that it's a great instinct to look for opportunities to differentiate oneself. I think it actually kind of aligns with what I was talking about a moment ago about the sectioning of the resume. What you've done here is certainly one way to do it, and the 3-section approach is an approach that many people do take. I'm fine with it. There's no hard rules on a lot of this stuff, by the way. It's candidate specific and experience specific. I do think you want to look for opportunities to showcase extra and differentiated and non-professional experience. There is perhaps an opportunity. We don't want that to occur to the detriment of your professional experience. My gut in looking at this and in kind of just meeting today, you could maybe go a little. Maybe there's a little more. A little more development in the professional. It's kind of like a meet halfway. Like,
right.
I don't think I like that you have this additional information and extracurricular and leadership type involvement on here to try to show what else you're passionate about and involved in and have achieved. I think maybe a little more, and we'll talk about the content of some of these bullets in the professional section. So maybe what it ends up being for you is a little more growth around the professional, but still some like strong presence and visual presence of these other things outside of the professional. A little more specific than that. We don't have to talk about this like exactly right now. These things that are in your education section,
sure.
That feels like a lot of text. It's a lot of text under a degree. I'd want to know, and this would be, again, like kind of a conversation you have around a resume before you put things on the page or as you update a resume, through what did these come through? And I'll zoom in back in a little bit. It reads a little textual to me, maybe a little too much text for what goes under an education section. I'd want to pick your brain not on this call, but I'd want to pick your brain and say, was this through some club? Was this through some initiative? What was the name of that initiative? What was your role in the club? And those kind of things. And then we could determine, are they substantial enough to potentially then go in that extracurricular section or in that leadership section or in that community section that I mentioned earlier. I usually think of it as if they are strong enough to do so, then they should go in that section. Sometimes they're like, you were kind of involved, but not a leader. It's not super substantial. Maybe those could stay as like one-liners in your under the education section. So that's an observation there. And similarly, in the additional information section that you have down below, I think, again, great instinct to show these other things that you're involved in. Right now, those bullets, as well as the bullets in the education section, it feels like, I'll use that word blink again. It's like hard to get a blink on them. They're like text without headers almost. Yes, there's a section header, but what was the organization? What was your role? What were the dates? There's a degree of formatting that could be discussed and incorporated here that would almost mirror, or in a sort of adapted way, mirror your jobs. So if it was like such and such an organization, and I was in this role, and I was in that role from this date to that date, you could think about incorporating those. I think right now, and think about how many resumes these admissions committees read, the admissions readers read. It's like text without a header, text without organization. I think that could be, so great instinct. I just think maybe some of the execution could be refined or enhanced.
Fair enough. Just an extension to this, Greg. So when we put the education over there, I've put something over there. I didn't want to list the subjects which I learned at school, because I'm pretty sure anyone could pull that up.
Yeah.
So I listed those things where I actually led and did something. So the ones which I've put over here are things which I headed teams, and the initiatives which I was able to pull through. So those were the things which I actually put in the education. Do you think that's a good utilization of space over here? Or would you want me to put a designation against it?
A designation regarding the courses you took, or a designation related to these activities that you've
Related to these activities?
Yeah, I think so. To answer that in two parts, the first part is good instinct. Again, I think your like specific courses that you took and stuff like that, they're gonna, for an MBA application purpose, they're gonna show up in your transcript. They're gonna have, it would be an inefficient use of space to hit those as redundant. I think it would be redundant to put them here. Now, a little caveat is, if you're ever applying to a job in the future, and that job is really specific to a certain industry, you're in the MBA program, you're applying for like jobs in real estate, and you don't have a real estate background, well, then you might put relevant coursework on the resume to show or signal to the target audience that you do have relevant experience. So that's a little bit of an aside, but not applicable here, because in an MBA app, they're going to have your transcript, see what you studied, etc. So I do think that it's wise. Yeah, let me look within my education experiences. What else did I do beyond the norm? Were there like scholarships, awards? How did I get those? On what merit? How many, 2 people selected out of 10,000 or whatever? What was it based on? Who selected it? Or in your case, these activities, extracurriculars, leadership things that signal involvement, leadership, passion, intellectual interest. For example, that first one that you've got under the education section, developed an in-house digital security system with face detection and identification capabilities for invigilation in computer labs in collaboration with the University Innovation Center. I think the execution of the bullet, some of the words in there, invigilation, I think we probably want to make that a more understandable, readily understandable word. In-house, I'm curious, in whose house? Like, so there's some things we could dissect within the actual bullet. But that's a good example of like a little improvement needed within the wording, but that's a great example of like, hey, I'm using this bullet to show like my innovative use of technology. So that's nice. And then in these others, you've got innovation, you've got leadership. So some of the execution I think could be improved, but good instinct around, let me look. You said designations. If I understand that correctly, it would be like, all right, well, like under what purview did this occur? Was it a certain club? Was I the president of that club? What was my role? Was it through a certain innovation center? What was the name of that innovation center? I think those labels probably do belong on here. The exact way those can show up can vary person to person. Sometimes it could just be at the start of these bullets. It would be like president. Turn this tracking on. It would be like, President Ama or president of, and then you put the, XYZ club and then a colon. But that's one way to do it. Another way would be to have a conversation or really think to yourself, of all of the things I have been involved in outside of school or outside of work, beyond the norms of my education or professional experience, what are all of those extracurricular or extra professional experiences? And a certain subset of those is going to be substantial enough to warrant inclusion, not necessarily here, but in a leadership section or community section of the resume that creates a more digestible visual for the reader of the resume to see job A, job B in the professional section, leadership experience, organization role, and a bullet or two. Organization role and a bullet or two. And there are different formatting mechanisms we could use here in order to save space, so that you don't end up with too many things. You have to be kind of judicious in choosing what belongs there. Some things won't make the cut for that section, and then maybe they belong as just a one-liner under the education, or a one-liner in the additional information. And by the way, that's sectioning, and then I'll put it back to you for questions. That sectioning, this revised sectioning, this revised sectioning and the use of like headers and designations, if you want to call them that, it will help make the information more digestible. It will add to the white space on your resume. Whereas again, now I look at this and I feel like it's like this bottom half feels like a little bit of text blobs, or like little too texty, or at least texty without headers, so that if I'm reading your resume, I can't get an immediate sense of what you were involved in. I'd have to really, really like kind of lock in here. And we wish they would do that, but people are reading these things. I mean, what do they say? The average resume is like people look at it for like 30 seconds or something like that. So that's just some thoughts there.
Fair enough. So, so if I understand this correctly, you would want to, maybe put a label against all of my activities so that it's more relatable. Even if it means if I compromise on a few section headings, that should be still all right, right?
Essentially, yes. And if just on the section headings, I think section headers, again, there's a little bit subjective, a little bit matter of preference. I personally, at least from an experimental standpoint, I would think about 4 sections instead of 3. Mm-hmm. Professional, then like leadership or community or involvement, you could call it different things depending on what ends up in there. Then education, then additional information. The difference between the leadership section and the additional information section is that the additional information section at the very bottom of the page is more like one-line facts that I'm just going to leave you with as an FYI, like certifications, extra courses if you took extra courses, languages,
right,
things like that. The stuff that would go in the leadership section or the community section would be things where you had a certain depth of involvement and enough of a depth of involvement to warrant more coverage. And within that section, you would have, there would be some improved labeling and things like that. So we would know the organization. So you're not actually getting rid of section labels. I'm actually suggesting you add one more section to reduce some of the current implications of the way it's laid out. And then within those sections to include organization and role where appropriate, so that the reader of the resume has that information and can more immediately digest it. They're going to see you're president of that club or whatever, and then they can read the bullet that goes with that.
One last question. So in the professional space, I have tried to convey impact of what I have done. Do you think that is reflecting over here?
Yep. Great question. And just quickly, as I dive into that, and for the folks out there watching, not to we hope we're not boring you. Hopefully this is applicable and relevant. I'm okay, Vashish and Dia, going a little bit over time here. If we had, I think, the top of the hour marked. So we can go into bonus time and ask a few extra questions, and if there might even be questions from the audience. So just quickly, and as applicable to folks out there as well, and then we'll get into your exact question. One thing I like to see, Vashish, that you did, again, good instinct here, which I encourage people out there to strongly consider. We'll see how Vashish used this line. I'm highlighting it, but it's a one-liner below the name of the company that provides very brief but valuable context into what this company does. What does it do? Who does it serve? Who are its clients? How many, where is it headquartered sometimes? Or how many countries does it operate in? What's the revenue? I think that's super helpful. I would actually say, think of it as a default. Everyone should consider that. The only times I think you don't need it are when it's so obvious what the company does. If you work like investment banking at Citigroup, you probably don't need to say like Citibank, or Deloitte, consulting at Deloitte. Okay, people universally known enough in this, in context of who's reading these resumes. Sometimes you don't need that, but most of the time, or a lot of the time, it is valuable. You work for a company where it's not immediately known, or maybe it's known in your country what that company does, but it's not going to be known to the admissions committee. So that is a very, very valuable thing to do. I would keep that personally to one line, as Vashi does here. Some people put 2 lines. I don't think you need 2 lines for that. I think 1 line is enough. And if you edit and fashion the wording correctly, 1 line should be sufficient. Different formatting preferences for different folks. Sometimes it might be an italicized line. Sometimes it won't be italicized. Other little things here too. This is very micro. Vashi, I personally go no periods at the end of my bullet points on resumes. I think would say probably the majority would consider that a norm or a default. If somebody has bullets at the periods at the end of their bullets, admissions committee is not going to, beat them up over that. But whatever you do, be consistent. That's the important thing. I think on your resume here, Vashi, we see some with periods and others without. I would say let's just get rid of all of them. Sure. I think that bullets, this is kind of into like resume nerd stuff, resume psychology stuff. I think they create an unnecessary staccato, an unnecessary but in the action. Whereas without them, it feels freer. So that's just a little bit of a thought there. But again, I like that you have these 1-liners. Some people, sometimes you could put revenue in parentheses at the back end of it, X $1 million annual revenue, if that saves you a little bit of space, that sort of thing. But I think that's good. And now another thing that might be helpful for other folks out there, we were talking during Dia's resume review about the location of the dates. Vashi, you have a more traditional approach to that, and kind of the approach that I was alluding to, which is where can the dates go? They can go here now. They're on the same line as, in your case, the role that you had. It gets the choreography gets a little trickier, if you will, when you've had multiple roles at the same company. That's a pretty micro conversation. We encounter when we do resume reviews. We deal with that with people. But in short, if you were at a certain company, let's say you had 2 roles at this top company, and you were at that company from like 2015 to 2020, you'd want to have a date that shows how long you were at the company in aggregate, as well as then dates that show each of the roles. So that's just a comment there. I think that for the most part, for most people applying to full-time MBA programs, you probably will end up showing months as well as you have here. I am fond, Vashi, of using 3-letter abbreviations as you've done here. Just watch out with the spacing. Sure. This is, again, from a consistency and kind of professional feel. You've got a space on either side of the dash here, but then there's no space. If we look at the dates, if people can see that, there's no space there. So we'd want to make sure you've got a space on either side of the dash, and that you then are consistent. Same thing too with whether there's spaces on either side of the apostrophe and such. But those are just things. So you asked about content. I'm trying to convey impact within these. I'm trying to convey impact within my bullet points. Absolutely, yes, you do want to show impact. Great. So Great Instinct, I see you've tried to quantify that impact as well. You won't always be able to do that, but where you can, let's do it. And informed estimates, you won't always know the exact number, but an honest and informed and true good faith estimate is okay for a resume. So does it come across for you here? I would say yes. For the most part, it does. So I think that you have a good eye toward the impact and quantifying that impact. For your bullets, I would say let's think about this though. I often talk to people about the what, how, impact formula for resume bullets. And again, it's like crazy with a resume because it's like 2 lines. Resume bullets are going to be 1 line or 2 lines of text usually. Yet the amount of thought that you put into those 2 lines, you end up wrestling on such a deep and specific level with what goes into just a 2-line bullet. But that's the challenge of the exercise. How do I maximize the value of this very finite amount of text that I have on the page? What, how, impact formula. What did I do? How did I do it? What was the impact? Not necessarily in that order, but how do I make sure that, and not necessarily in that order, and not necessarily always those parts, but what did I do? How did I do it? What was the impact? I think we want to make sure that those, like the how, let's say, or those other parts of the bullet are clear here as well. There might be some situations here where, in an effort to make sure you touched on the impact, there might be some situations here where the how is not always as fully covered as it could be. So, just some examples like, okay, coordinated with engineering. I mean, this is a good example, coordinated with engineering teams. So that's maybe a good example here. I'm highlighting a good example of a how. You actually are saying I coordinated with these teams and here's where they were. So I'm taking advantage of that to show some international experience. But thinking about the how, and so some people have just what they did and they don't have the impact. In your case, there might be some situations here where you have a lot of impact, but we want to make sure that the other elements of value that might be lurking in the bullets or in the how you did these things is present and clear. There might be certain situations on here too. You kind of have to really dig into each of these bullets. In some cases, leading with the impact makes sense. In other cases, leading with like a strong action verb like lead or manage or led or managed or spearheaded or whatever the case may be, that might make more sense to start the bullet, and then the impact could come at the back end of the bullet as like the culmination of the bullet. If it wasn't lead or managed, maybe it was analyzed or things like that. So those are just some observations here. Another kind of bullet content consideration for you, Vashi, and other people out there to consider is, as you look between, so I mentioned the what, how, impact formula. By the way, other people consider situation, action, result. You'll hear that a lot for essays. Some people think that's a good way, and I agree. It's kind of cousin, if you will, to the what, how, impact formula. Think about that for each of your bullets. Situation, action, result. It basically is the what, how, impact formula. Situation is the what, action is the how, result is the impact. Keep that little thread in mind, even for your bullets. You're not trying to write like an essay about each of these bullets. It is just a bullet, but keep that little formula in mind. So those component parts, unpacking the value of your bullets. Now, within each bullet, you want to unpack the value. Think of the different and interesting things you did in order to achieve whatever's covered on your resume. Also think bird's eye view. As I look across all of the different bullets you're sharing for a given job, what is the unique value of each bullet? What is the unique ethos or the unique spirit of each bullet? Meaning, one of these bullets, like we wouldn't want to have 4 or 5 bullets that all talk about engineering, or 4, I'm not saying you're doing that, Vashi, but just in general, 4 or 5 bullets that only talk about engineering, 4 or 5 bullets that only talk about analytical things. Some of those are okay, but let's think from a more diverse standpoint. How can I capture all of the different and valuable corners or topics of what I do? So maybe one bullet's unique spirit is more analytical. Another's is more innovative or technological. But another's is more collaborative. And another's is more leadership oriented. And another's is more about communication skills or interpersonal or influence or presenting to very senior people or working in diverse teams or working internationally. And these are not going to be mutually exclusive. Many of these bullets will have multiple of these themes embedded within them. But let's make sure that diversity is there. I think you've got elements of it. Maybe there'll be a little bit more.
So just a second. If you could please scroll down, please.
Scroll down. Yep.
So in the additional information.
Yep.
So the additional information in the second point. So would you rather I put this in the job section because this was at work? So would you rather say that I put this in the job section rather than put it down over here? Both for point 2 and 3. I mean 1 and 2. Both 1 and 2 are work related. So
Yeah.
would you rather say that I put it up top rather than
Negotiated for and enabled balanced working hours for 3 global teams combined work. Okay, great question. Mentored 15 engineering terms. So the two thoughts that enter my head here are two options. One would be up in the professional section to show these additional initiatives. Within that section, there sometimes could be a subheader, something like, if you look on the screen and I could get this right, the spacing's a little off, but some people could have like special initiatives or additional projects or special projects, and then you put them there. That's
Right.
an option, and you might italicize this, you might not, you might bold it, but you put them underneath there. What does that do? It shows that they occurred through the job, but it creates some visual separation for the reader and some categorical context. If you had like 8 bullets in a row, each are 2 lines, that's a lot of text to digest. Person's probably not going to fully appreciate the value of what's there. But if you had like 4 bullets that were core to your job and then 2 that were special projects or something, that could be one way to capture it there. That's one option. Another option is, I talked about this leadership or community or involvement section. They could go in there under the label of like firm initiatives or the name of your company, special initiatives. You kind of have to play with the language. It's a little bit situational. Those would be 2 options. The latter of those options is more akin to what you have now, but with clearer labeling to it. So again, somebody who just sees your resume quickly or for the first time would have the ability to digest that information more readily, and also the signals using the words on the page to show that these are extra or additional or special, or you're labeling, you're controlling the messaging around them a little bit more, rather than making them do the work to go down here and say, oh, wait a second, are these, like, what did he do? Did he do these at work? Did he not do these at work? Where did he do them? What did he do them for? I got to read the text. So we want to basically make them do as little work as possible. We want to control the messaging as much as we can. But that's a great question.
Sure.
Other questions?
One last profile-related question. So I'm in a bit of a dilemma between appearing for the GMAT or the GRE. So I've already appeared for the GRE and I have a 325. Considering GRE doesn't feature in BSchool ranking, so do you think that puts a candidate at a disadvantage if they apply with a GRE, especially considering scholarships and everything else?
I think the short answer these days is no.
Okay.
Though there are still some schools out there. Let me unpack. Short answer, no, not really. Always a little nuance to it. Let me unpack that nuance a little bit. If we look at the percentages of students at a given school who are now applying with GREs or enrolled in classes with GREs, when we look across, let's say like a US top 25, it's usually going to be like 20, 25, some schools 35, 40% of the class now, GREs. Duke Fuqua, 38% last year. Michigan Ross, 37. These are the high ones. Tuck was 39% last year. A lot of the others around. Go ahead, sorry.
Macoombs has a high GRE percentage.
Yep. Let me see if I have that data point. Yep.
I think it's 30.
Yep. So in a similar ballpark as well. Others maybe more conventionally around like 20. So, but the shades of gray, the nuance to the answer though is there still are some schools out there that you'll hear a little bit, you say, we still kind of prefer the GMAT. So you want to kind of have your ear to the street on that. Other things you mentioned, scholarships. I do think that a high or a plus GMAT score creates more scholarship potential than a higher plus GRE score. Maybe that's a little bit of a subjective. I don't know what data I'd point to support that, but anecdotally, if you're applying to a school with a 700 average GMAT score and you have like a 770 GMAT, the fact that you are multiple standard deviations above their average is going to pack more punch, because the GMAT is such a visible and discussed and more ranking relevant, more popular in the popular discourse, the MBA discourse. The GMAT's going to pack more punch with that. But conversely, a GMAT scores for those same reasons. If your GMAT score is not, especially applying from a very crowded and competitive applicant pool, if your GMAT score is not above the fold, above the average, tangibly above the average, it can be harder to get in. There could be more leeway with the GRE, at least as kind of popularly considered. Still with the GRE, if you're applying from a crowded and competitive demographic, look at the average GRE scores for the schools that you're applying to, and you will want to target being, tangibly above those averages. But hopefully that helps shed some light into it. Sure.
Thank you so much, Craig.
We're over time here, but hope this helped. If there are, maybe we can take two. If you guys still have the stomach for 5 more minutes, maybe we'll take 2 questions from the audience if there are any. Otherwise, we could wrap it up. But hopefully, those conversations were valuable for everyone out there. I got to pull my screen a little bit bigger. What could be possible reasons for MIT to ask for the resume in reverse order? Any elaboration possible? I applied to Sloan. So I just want to clarify for the sake of what I said. It's not that they ask for things in reverse order. They just have a prescriptive. They say MIT, they say we want your education first. We want 3 sections on the resume. We want education first. We want professional experience section, and we want second, and we want additional third. Within those sections, you should be using reverse chronological order, meaning within those sections, the most recent goes first. So it's not reverse within the sections. I was just kind of commenting that in my mind, when education is at the top of the page and you've worked for, let's say, 5 years, to me, it feels a little bit non-intuitive to have education first and then professional experience second. So from a more of a macro point of view, I guess there is a little bit, you say, okay, well, I graduated college in 2000. Ironically, too, by the way, MIT Sloan does this for their Sloan Fellows program, which is a mid-career executive program, which I've worked with, encountered many times with applicants. And they say to themselves, well, I graduated college in 2002. I have 18 years of work experience, and they want me to put that education section still first, like it was, feels like ancient history. I have a almost 20-year career. Shouldn't professional experience go at the top of the page? But no, you should make sure that for any school, follow their formatting suggestions. And again, just to clarify my earlier comment, it is not that MIT is asking for things in reverse order. They're just dictating to you the preferred sectioning that they want. Within those sections, the most recent should still go first. And for them, I think the logic is just consistency. I've talked again about digestibility of information today. When they have consistency between, they can more naturally compare, by the way, too, by redacting names and contact information at the top of the page, what they ask you to do. They're removing potential location bias, and even name bias. There have been studies about that out there as well. So hopefully that helps. We could take the next question. Any tips for resume gaps? What about short-lived jobs like 8 months? I think that short-lived jobs, I think if it's a job you had something like 8 months, I think it belongs on there. There's, you're going to end up needing to put it in the application anyway, in the employment history or the employment information section. If you've had a lot of jobs that were short-lived, then you might need to explain that in the optional section or the optional essay, or again, some schools it's going to be optional essay, some schools it's going to be please explain, something like jumping around jobs, that would go optional. Employment gaps could either go optional, or some schools will have a little specific thing where they say, please explain any employment gaps you had. Red gaps, you got to explain them. There's no way kind of around them. I've seen people try to reduce the immediate visual on the gaps by using only years on the resume rather than months and years. That's a strategic consideration. It does probably reduce the immediacy of the visual of the gap. In other words, instead of like May to December, you'd have like just the year, but then it gets a little weird too, because then it's like, well, if are certain jobs so short where I just have like the same year as the start point and end point, they're going to see those gaps anyway, and you're going to need to confront them or address them within the app. So you kind of have to play around with it. It could be situation specific, but I think the short-lived jobs belong on the resume.
So one short question here, Greg. So how many months do you think that one should explain a gap? Assume one has a 3-month gap. So do you think that needs to be explained, or can we just ignore that?
Yeah, most schools will actually say it in their app, or many schools will actually say it in their app. Usually 3 is the number you see. So if they will say something like, if you have had any any gaps of greater than 3 months,
okay, please
explain or address. I've seen some where they say 2 months. So just keep your eyes peeled on that. If it's certainly below 2, I think that's just not like, it's almost not even a gap. Some of that is just natural transition time. Sometimes when you see it, a lot of schools will actually say if it's greater than 3, then address it. There are a couple of schools out there who say greater than 2, but you keep your eyes peeled within the application as well.
Sure.
Any last questions from the crowd? Is resume preferred over the information filled in the application form? I'm not totally sure I know what's meant by preferred there. You do have to do both of those. If preferred means in terms of the interpretation of the information, I would say, the information shared within the different parts of the application, they're going to read it, they're going to digest it. If I had to pick, I would say, yeah, the resume is more valuable and creates more of an imprint on the admissions committee than the brief descriptions provided in the education section, or in the activity set. But I was kind of comparing it to the education, to the employment section. No, I would be thoughtful and smart and strategic, and I would think about and edit and fashion the language around what you share in any part of the application. What I was saying before about like resume, the resume is going to do a better job of capturing your employment and capturing you, and it is a big piece of what you submit. Some schools will have you put like a job description or company description within the app as well. Still important. Those probably still important, maybe not quite like the resume. But other schools are going to have big sections for activities, and you're going to end up, or extracurriculars, and you're going to end up with more information there about your activities than you do on the resume, even if you include them in briefer form on the resume. So in those cases, the activities and the activity explanations and your leadership captured in the app are going to be more important because you have more coverage on it in the app than in the resume. But again, on that activities thing, the difference from school to school varies enormously. Some schools now have no area in the app. There's a couple, but have no area in the app at all for you to put activities or extracurriculars. Others, like Wharton, you can list them but not elaborate on them. No explanation, no description, just org and title. And this could change year to year. While others will say here, like, up to 100 words per or something like that. So, you want to make sure you're using the space wisely. We'll take one more question. What if I'm changing my domain from technology to a different sector like arts, culture, heritage? What activities should I highlight more, the experience field or the change I am wanting? Interesting question. Now, if you're transitioning to arts, culture, and heritage, the first thing I'd ask is, are you applying to an MBA program? that sounds like. No, not to say that there's not business to be done in those sectors, but that would be my first thought. What activity should I highlight more, the experience field or the change I'm wanting? I mean, if these are things if there are activities that are going on a resume or in an application form, they are things that you've done. So there are things that you've done already. So I think it's you kind of have to base them off what you've actually done. If you're choosing between things, then you have to just be strategic about probably a mix. I would think probably a mix. You can start looking for opportunities to touch on some things that do orient your experience and your resume toward where you'd like to head. So a mix of what I've done in the past to showcase those accomplishments, as well as an orientation toward where I want to head. But you wouldn't be talking like, I want to transition here. You would be highlighting activities on the resume or in the app that you've actually already done. So we will leave it there. You probably saw some links and such flash across the bottom of the page. We invite you to visit avantiprep.com, where you can sign up for a free consultation. For those of you out there who might be encountering interviews soon, we do have a pretty deep and thorough, very deep and thorough interview prep service. Typically 3 hours in duration, whereby you go through an extended mock interview in the style of the school that you're practicing for, and then a 2-hour question by question coaching feedback strategy session. It doesn't have to be all 3 hours. You could do a shorter version as well. But you can see the links up on the page. So visit the website, look at the services, sign up for a free consultation if relevant. Vashi, thank you again for your time, and thank you everybody out there for your patience. Hopefully this helped, and hopefully the nuggets that we talked through and some of this resume nerd stuff, I say that about myself, is helpful to you. We do work with applicants, of course, on resume reviews and everything else. So happy to chat, and hope to encounter you in the future, and wish everybody the best of luck. Have a great day.